India's electric vehicle (EV) dream is one of ambition, urgency, and strategic necessity. As the world transitions toward clean mobility, New Delhi has staked its claim to becoming a major player in the global EV revolution, not just as a consumer, but as a manufacturer. With a target of making 30% of all new car sales electric by 2030, and policies like the FAME2 and Production-Linked Incentive (PLI) schemes driving domestic innovation, India is betting on EVs to transform its industrial landscape. The government's $3.1 billion PLI outlay, combined with surging market growth from $3.21 billion in 2022 to an expected $113.99 billion by 2029, underlines how rapidly this sector is expanding. But just as India begins to carve its niche, China, the global EV superpower, has opened a new front, a legal challenge at the World Trade Organization, WTO, that threatens to complicate India's clean mobility ambitions. China's complaint alleges that India's EV subsidy programs unfairly discriminate against foreign firms, particularly Chinese ones, violating the WTO's National Treatment Clause that mandates equal treatment of imported and domestic goods. Beijing claims India's local content requirements, provisions that reward manufacturers for using locally made parts and batteries, amount to prohibited import substitution subsidies. On the surface, this appears to be a trade dispute about rules, but beneath it lies a calculated strategy. China is using both legal instruments and its dominance over global EV supply chains to maintain its technological and market supremacy, while slowing down India's rise in the electric mobility space. To understand the stakes, one must first appreciate the scale of China's dominance. As of 2024, China accounted for more than 70% of the world's EV production and sold over 11 million electric vehicles, more than the rest of the world combined just 2 years earlier. From raw materials to finished vehicles, China has built a vertically integrated ecosystem that spans every stage of the value chain. It controls 60% of the world's lithium processing, 73% of cobalt, 68% of nickel, and an astonishing over 90% of global rare earth refining. This level of integration gives Beijing unmatched leverage, not just economic, but geopolitical. India, in comparison, imports more than 85% of its lithium-ion batteries from China, spending over $7 billion in the past 5 years. China's first strategic move came in early 2025, when it restricted exports of key rare earth elements such as samarium, gadolinium, and dysprosium, metals essential for EV motors and batteries. The move sent shockwaves across global markets. In India, it triggered immediate concern among automakers, with some warning that production lines could soon be disrupted. "This is a double blow," one executive said. "We are trying to build self-reliance, but the supply chain still runs through China." Beijing's timing was not coincidental. The restrictions coincided with rising scrutiny of Chinese investments in India's EV sector, a pressure point China used to remind the world of its chokehold on the mineral backbone of clean energy. Parallel to these supply chain maneuvers, China launched its legal offensive at the WTO, challenging India's FAME2 and PLI subsidy schemes. Beijing's argument is simple. By linking subsidies to local content, India is effectively excluding Chinese manufacturers from fair competition. But for New Delhi, this is more than an economic policy. It's a matter of national security and strategic autonomy. India sees its EV program as a cornerstone of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the push for self-reliance in critical technologies. From New Delhi's perspective, the irony of China's complaint is glaring. Beijing itself built its EV empire on decades of state-backed industrial policy, pouring an estimated $230 billion in subsidies between 2009 and 2023 into its domestic industry. China wants India to stop copying its playbook, as the Economic Times wryly observed. The legal fight is thus not a technical disagreement about trade clauses, but a geopolitical extension of Sino-Indian rivalry. Ever since the Galwan Valley clashes in 2020, both countries have viewed each other's economic policies through the prism of national security. What was once a competition in border infrastructure has now moved to the realm of high technology and green energy, the industries that will define economic power in the 21st century. Concrete examples of this friction are visible on the ground. In 2023, India rejected a $1 billion investment proposal by China's EV giant BYD and its Indian partner, citing security concerns. The move was interpreted globally as part of India's economic Cold War with China, a deliberate attempt to keep Chinese influence out of critical industries. Similarly, the joint venture between China's SAIC Motor and India's JSW Group has faced regulatory scrutiny to ensure that the Indian partner retains majority control. This represents India's post-2020 de-risking strategy, allowing limited Chinese participation under strict oversight, without letting Beijing dominate strategic industries. The consequences of this friction, however, are real and immediate. India's stringent localization rules, which require up to 50% of EV components to be made domestically, have become difficult to implement when critical minerals and advanced components remain China-dependent. Facing the risk of production bottlenecks, New Delhi has had to consider temporarily easing localization mandates to maintain momentum in EV manufacturing. The very policies that aimed to build resilience may, ironically, be slowed down by the dependence they sought to eliminate. Yet, the long-term logic of India's policy remains intact. China's WTO challenge is unlikely to derail India's EV ambitions. If anything, it may strengthen New Delhi's resolve to build indigenous capacity. The dispute has exposed the world's over-reliance on China's mineral and battery ecosystem and given India a clear mandate: to build alternatives. India holds the world's fifth largest rare earth reserves, yet processes almost none domestically. Developing refining capabilities, partnering with trusted allies, and securing critical mineral agreements with countries like Australia, Canada, and Mozambique are now national priorities. These partnerships will not only de-risk India's EV supply chain, but also align with the global push for transparent, diversified, and sustainable sourcing. China's actions reveal a dual strategy, using the WTO as a diplomatic tool and rare earths as an economic weapon. By attacking India's incentive programs under the guise of free trade, Beijing is attempting to constrain India within the very global rules it once exploited. At the same time, by weaponizing its mineral monopoly, it signals that no country can build an EV ecosystem without Chinese cooperation. At least, for now. India's challenge, therefore, is not just technological, but systemic: to decouple from this dependence without collapsing its growth momentum. In the end, the battle over India's EV policies is not about subsidy percentages or tariff codes. It's about who will control the future of mobility and, by extension, the direction of global industrial power. The stakes could not be higher. The global clean energy transition represents a $2 trillion opportunity, and whoever dominates EV manufacturing will set the tone for the next phase of globalization. China wants to keep that privilege. India wants to claim its share. The EV war between Beijing and Delhi is, at its core, a clash of models. China's approach is centralized, state-led, and monopolistic, controlling supply chains from the mine to the showroom. India's is decentralized, incentive-based, and democratic, betting on private enterprise and international partnerships. The WTO case is merely a symptom of this deeper competition. Ultimately, India's EV journey will depend on whether it can transform its vulnerability into strength, refining its own rare earths, scaling up domestic battery production, and forging alliances that reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. As global manufacturing rebalances and climate goals accelerate, one truth is becoming clear. The clean mobility revolution is not just an environmental race, it's a geopolitical one. And in that race, India's fight with China isn't about one trade case. It's about defining who will drive the future.